I'm Clarke Speaks, the catastrophic injury lawyer. Welcome to The Verdict. This is 5 Failures from Success.
My name's Carson Grace Toomer, and I'm here with American injury lawyer Clarke Speaks. All right, Mr. Speaks, we've gone over 5 events in your life that at the time you felt like were catastrophic failures, and you have now said that they kind of led to your success. What are your key takeaways? What is your parting message?
Well, so the first thing that came to mind, because in preparation for this, I was talking to my kids about it, and one of them says, "Hey, well, really, like the first failure that we talked about, like when I was a kid, my dad left when I was like 9 or whatever, and they were like, hey, that really wasn't your failure, you know." And I was thinking about it, I was like, you know what, you're right, that really wasn't mine. I didn't do that. But I don't think that makes me unique. I think a lot of times people are negatively impacted, especially early in their life when they have less control over what's going on around them and the course of their life. You know, when we're kids, but between birth and 18 or whatever, we don't have as much control over what happens to us as we do later in life. So I don't think that there's anything unusual about that this first couple things or whatever are really not necessarily my doing. But they are problems and they are challenges and they're failures. They just might not necessarily be our failures. But we still have to deal with them, you know, like whether it's abuse or poverty or, you know, something else, you know. You may not have been responsible for creating this situation, but you have to deal with it and you have to proceed, you know. And so these things can always be excuses for failure or platforms for success. You know, if somebody grows up, I used to do a lot of criminal law, right? So sometimes I would come into contact with kids who had suffered like ridiculous, you know, unspeakable events. And some of them would go on to have rich, happy, purposeful, you know, full, content, joyful lives. And some of them would just, you know, it would just continue to spiral out of control with alcoholism, drug abuse, living on the street, and all this kind of stuff. At some point in my career, I did abuse cases, and you would see that sometimes abusers would turn around and become abusees. People who had been abused would come around and become abusers. And then you would see sometimes people who had been abused would go on to, you know, protect people who maybe had been abused. And you're like, what is the psychological difference? What would cause those different outcomes from very similar circumstances, you know? And so I think that is the mindset that takes place, that these first failures don't necessarily have to be something that you did or you created, but you still have to deal with it. And the idea, again, is these things that happen in our lives are negative things, especially can be platforms for excuses for failure or platforms for success. And it's a personal decision as to how you want to approach each of these things. So that's the first thing. The second thing that comes to my mind when we're talking about these things is, and you and I talked about this before. You know, Ted Lasso, you know, the series. So one of the things that he says in there is be curious, right? This is one of the messages, the central message. You know, he talks about he was driving his kid to school, and he sees a quote painted on the side of the building: "Be curious," and he thinks about it, and he thinks, you know. People have underestimated him his whole life, and people have kind of always thought that they knew everything about him just by seeing him or whatever. And that's just not true, you know. And just the idea behind it is, you know, there's nothing worse than a know-it-all. People who are overconfident and people who think that they know everything, in my opinion, and people who just make all these assumptions based on limited information about who other people are, about their limitations, about, you know, and so I see that on a regular basis, right? So one of my core values is to learn, right? And so we'll talk about more about these core values, but so I always want to continue learning. So I feel like I can learn from everybody on earth, right? We're all good at something. I know, just sure as I'm sitting here, there's stuff I could learn from you. There's stuff I can learn from Eli. Stuff I can learn from anybody. So I want to try to do that, And so I go to these conferences on a regular basis. And at some point I was probably going to 10 conferences in a year, and they're all over, all over the country or world in some cases. And the idea behind that is you go there and you learn from other people. Some are doing the same thing as you. Maybe they're farther down the road. Some are doing the same thing as you. Maybe they're not as far down the road. Some are doing different things. But you can learn from all of them. You can learn there's something you can learn from the waiter. There's something you can learn from the owner. There's something you can learn from the accountant, just if you go into a restaurant, And so I remember going to this one conference in particular. And this is, when I go to the conferences, I go and I'm like, hey, I paid my money to be here. I'm going to sit in the front row and I'm going to ask every question that I can ask. And if it annoys everybody around me, so be it. I want to find out what I need to know in order to be able to improve and to learn. Well, so there's a break in the conference, and there's like 300 people at this, maybe 400 people at this conference. So I go out, to get something to drink or whatever, and I'm coming back, and I stop and I see this, and if I see somebody, usually I'll stop and talk to them for a few minutes and find out a little bit about them and see what, hey, what can I learn from this person? And there's a guy out there who looks, he's become a little bit of a friend of mine, but he looks a little bit disheveled, right? He's wearing a T-shirt. Everybody else is wearing like sort of more business casual stuff. It's like a faded Captain America T-shirt and stuff. And he's getting his coffee, and I start talking to him and stuff. And he starts asking me questions, right? I've been to these things for years. One thing that's for sure, if you get a bunch of lawyers in the group, not many of them ask questions. They all think they know everything, right? So he starts asking me questions, like, where are you from? What do you do? How many employees do you have? All these different questions. And I'm like, this is different, So I'm talking to him for a few minutes. And then based on my answers to the questions, he gives me some very specific feedback on what's going on in my world. And it's all accurate, 100% accurate. And I'm like, okay, what's the deal? Who is this, right? So this is a guy who runs a very, very successful law firm in Florida, who also has a coaching practice. He coaches other lawyers, and also has a series of conferences himself. And he's just like me. He goes to all these different conferences, and he's since become like a friend of mine and a mentor and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, and meanwhile, during the course of our conversation, another guy comes up, who is this is probably his first or second conference, and who's very far back in the process of developing some of these skills and all. And he immediately just starts telling us all about how to do all of the things we're doing. And he and I both have that very similar approach to this new person, right? Which is, okay, what can I learn from you? And so we just started asking questions. But he never once asked either of us a question. And he could learn something from me, and he could learn a lot from this other guy. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. And so as the idea that, if we're curious and we ask questions and we generally are interested in the responses, we can learn a lot. And then you can learn a lot from lots of different people. And then, what it also sort of makes me think is like, where does confidence and how do you resolve confidence versus self-doubt, right? Because I'm a confident guy, at the end of the game, I want the ball. Like if we're going to it's one of the most difficult things to do as a trial lawyer is to watch somebody else try a case, because you're like sitting in your seat, I would do it differently. I would stand here. I would say this. Oh my gosh, and you're kind of playing it through in your head. Even movies, sometimes you're doing this. If you're a lawyer and a trial lawyer especially, you have a confidence in what you're able to do to help somebody. But for me, and partly based on my own experiences of, my dad left when I was a kid, and we had to kind of go to work, and we had to and because of that, it forced me to look in other directions for mentorship, for leadership, for examples. My mom was a big influence in my life. aunts were big influences in my life. Other relatives, my uncles were big influences in my life. My coaches, teachers, they were big influences in my life. Neighbors were influences in my life, and much more than they probably would ever know. You know what I mean? You're an athlete. You know how there's some coaches probably that you have that you're just like, you'll be thinking about those lessons and those conversations when you're raising your kids and throughout everything else you do in your life, when you're faced with challenges and stuff. Well, I'm the same way, So when I look back at those experiences, I can't tell you how priceless I think those. So if I could go back and make it so my dad wouldn't leave, at the time, probably I would have, yeah, I don't want you to leave. But in reality, it's a blessing again, because it gives me the ability to learn from all these other different places. And it instills in me the idea of, confidence, yes, but I can learn from somebody else, and maybe they knew more about it than I. And let me see, let me ask, let me be curious. I think that's a hugely valuable piece of at least my personal story. Another thing that comes up is, or that I think about when I think about these sort of takeaways, is other people that I have known that have been through these adversities and through these failures. And I think about this kid, this young man who was on our podcast, Catastrophic Comeback, Parker Bird, who I think has an incredible story. And we can put a link in this episode or whatever to his conversation. But there was two things in particular about him that struck me. If you'll remember, Parker Bird was a college baseball player who was in a boating accident and lost his leg, and then went on very quickly to change his mindset from being a Major League Baseball player to being the first D1 Division I athlete, college athlete, to play with a prosthetic leg. And he succeeded in that. And then he went to the same school I did. And so, and then when he did get out and play in that game, everybody went crazy at the stadium, but then also all of us were online and all this and watching, and it was like a big deal. So, and so we had him on the podcast, and two lessons in particular came from that conversation. This is another example of how, you can learn from people, So at that point, I kind of had this mapped out about what we're going to do, what we're going to say, and all this, and what we're going to try to convey and share with people. He comes on here and kind of changes some of that, because two lessons that I learned from him especially were, one was connecting the dots. He had this terrible thing happen in his life. I mean, imagine you're 18 years old, and you in a horrible, you're thinking about playing college baseball freshman year, going on to play in a great program, great coaches, great players, competitive, every year a threat to be in the College World Series and all this. And you're thinking about all these things that you want to try to accomplish. Well, then in the course of an hour, a day, a week, all that changes, and you lose. I think he got hit in the arm with a propeller, and lost, leg, and then another leg. So he was very seriously injured. He had to go through the process of thinking, I might die. I might, and then they were going to be able to save his leg, and then ultimately they couldn't save his leg. So he had to process all that very, very quickly. But when we talked to him, all these different events happened to him during this experience, right? He just happened to meet this kid at baseball practice that was into boating and all this, and kept inviting him. And then they just happened to have a weekend where they had a weekend off. And then they were supposed to, they went skiing or tubing or whatever one day, and they were supposed to be done and go back. Well, then their plans fell through, and they tubed the next day. And then there's like 4 or 5 people on the boat, and then he happens to be one of the guys in the back. I mean, that goes back and tubes his first day. And then they have a good run, but instead of getting in the boat, they have another run. And then somebody's goofing around, or the boat accidentally gets put into reverse, and it goes back. So a pessimist is going to connect those dots and go, God, why did you let this happen? How could you do this to me? Look, all these things, if they had been just lined up a little bit differently, this never would have happened to me, and be bitter and be angry and be frustrated. And then that would have taken his life in a downward spiral that would be very, very negative. He didn't do that at all. Instead, he goes back and he connects the dots in such a way as that are super positive, right? The same fact pattern, he just connects it in a way that is positive. Look at this. If it hadn't have been that one of the kids on the boat had lost a friend in a similar accident the year before, and so that kid knew exactly what to do. And then there was the first boat that came to try to to offer assistance, saw how badly he was injured, and said, "I'm sorry, we got kids on the boat. We can't help. This is going to be scarring for them mentally." Those people probably couldn't help. The next boat that came had a nurse on it. The only reason they were coming back is because the couple on the boat had gotten in an argument. So that was a blessing because that person was able to render medical care on the way back to the marina. And then his parents had a flat tire. But that's not what he looked at. He looked at, they just happened to go to this gas station. And the gas station had one tire that would fit their car. And it was like just before 5 o'clock or whatever. So he connected all the same facts. He just connected in a way that led him to be optimistic and faithful and think and look at it and go, hey, look at how God was there for me, And I think that's interesting. The other thing that I thought was interesting about my conversation with him was 1% better, the concept of 1% better all the time, this concept of self-improvement, and that comes from the idea of, if something, happens and you're in a place in your life and you want to get to another place, then getting a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better every day, just marginal improvements are important. I thought that was interesting.
Okay, so what do you think is the key to kind of turning these events in your life that were negative into something that you can learn from, be curious about, and eventually success?
So I think part of it is mindset. Everybody is going to face adversity at some point in their lifetime. The strongest, richest, toughest people on earth are going to be humbled over time. You know what I mean? We're all going to face challenges. Some face them early, some face them late. We're all going to face multiple challenges. You don't know anybody who hasn't faced just unbelievable challenges. We're all going to die. You know what I mean? What bigger challenge is it? What bigger adversity is it than that? So to me, in the adversity that we face during the course of our life, we can't always control that. Sometimes we can. We can make good decisions and avoid, negative consequences to the best of our ability. But sometimes bad things happen to us or to people we care about, And so what's our, so it's our response to these things rather than the things I think that define who we are. One of our core values, I talk about core values, and so we'll talk about that more in a series called the Elevation Leadership Summit. But core values are the things that you believe in, these fundamental things that you believe in, and that kind of make up who you are and govern your conduct and your decisions and the way that you do things and the way that you treat people. So one of my core values is this concept of overcoming adversity. And I have these core values that I have are written down right there. So they're like on my table right beside where I am all the time. They're on my wall. They're available to me at all times, right? So the first part of this particular overcome adversity is to, when challenges arise, there's a process that we go through. And I've told my kids since they were little kids, this is how we do this. Number one, we identify the problem, the challenge. What are the dimensions of the challenge? And then from there, we brainstorm. And in my opinion, we collaborate. That's kind of what I'm big on collaboration. So I'll collaborate with somebody, people I trust, people I know, people that might know something about the problem, and try to think through, okay, these are the different options alternative solutions that I might, and then I'll pick one, and I'll go, hey, after I've collaborated and brainstormed and weighed these different solutions, I'll go, okay, this is the one that I think suits best, fits best. And then I'll implement that thing. This is what I'm going to decide to do. I'm going to do this to the best of my ability. And then I'll evaluate and adjust if necessary. And so that's the process, so it's identify, collaborate, decide, implement, evaluate, and adjust. And so I think that that is something that I learned to do over the course of these failures with with my dad and with some of these other difficult things that have happened in my life, over time, my mom would always say, hey, listen, I like the way that if something doesn't work out the way that you want it to, you'll go to plan B. And I was like, well, I hadn't really thought about it, but I see your point. And then so I've sort of formalized that in with my core values, and I think that's important. And so I'll give you an example. So when my kids were growing up, I coached them in sports, right? I never played soccer, so but I can get away with coaching 5 to 10-year-olds, right? You know what I mean? Or and I played basketball, but I was not great. But I can watch enough YouTube videos and go to clinics and collaborate with some of my friends and who are good at coaching. So I would coach them. And so I remember I would, towards the end of the year, at the end of the year one time, we had this group of like 9-year-old girls. We had a good time. We had a lot of success and a lot of fun. And we had lost in this championship game, and my guys were just devastated, you know what I mean? And so I remember writing them this letter and talking to them about it, about, hey, you know what, sometimes, you're going to lose. You're going to face these challenges. You're going to face these obstacles, but they're going to make you stronger, and they're going to make you, and then later on, when you get to where you're going to go in life, whether you're a doctor or a teacher or a police officer or whatever, you're going to think back about these obstacles that you overcame as a kid and these challenges that you had, even these lessons that you learned playing basketball, and you're going to, so the thing that we talked about is let's say you're a physician, you're a doctor, and so there's a lot that's being asked from you, right? Somebody comes in and they're injured, somebody's kid comes in and they have cancer or whatever, and you got to figure out a way, to deal with that problem. And so the advantage in having these experiences is that you can sort of be tough and be strong and be confident and take the position of, hey, you know what? This person is going to die someday, they're going to die someday, but not today. Today, they're on my table. Today, they're in my room. Today, I'm going to give this person back to their mother or their sister or their husband or whatever, And so I think that having that place in you where you go, okay, this is a challenge, or my feelings are hurt, or I'm not feeling strong or confident, and you just go, forget all that, I'm going to be successful and do this thing. And this really came home to me like this past week, this past month or whatever. I'm out of town. I'm actually, my family and I are in Europe this past month, and it's and I'm way far away from my office, and I'm not getting cell phone coverage. I can just get internet coverage very sporadically for some reason. And I'm having trouble communicating with my office, and so, and that has never happened to me in 20, 30 years, however long it's been, it's never happened to me where I had that kind of trouble communicating with my office. And so I'm like, because I'm that far away, and because I'm not having communication with my office and with my clients the way that or with my office about my clients the way that I'm accustomed to, it's just driving me absolutely crazy. And so I'm like really anxious about this whole thing, and I'm like, every chance I get, I'm ducking into these different, coffee shops and stuff and trying to get on their internet and stuff. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it should be this, great experience, but it's instead, it's kind of like, I'm really, preoccupied with trying to, and then so the thing ends with me. The trip ends with us going to London, and then we go to see AC/DC at a concert, and it's cool because AC/DC was one of my favorite bands, and even though they're like 80 years old now. But my kids know who that is. We've listened to it like on the way to soccer practice. When soccer tryouts or whatever. I remember one time my wife was like trying to put together a playlist, and she had like, kind of soft rock, and I'm like, let me try this for a minute, and put on AC/DC, and everybody's, and by the end of it, by the time we get there, I'm ready to just run around on the field. But they seem mildly enthused. So it's always been a source of energy. You know what I mean? Like when you're working out or you're running or you're training for something, and you have some music on or something, and that you find personally energizing and so I'm like, we're late to the concert, and not because the subway was backed up, and not late later than I wanted to get there, still early for the concert. But I'm like, kind of frustrated. I'm preoccupied about what's going on back at the office, and I'm like trying to figure out, some stuff. And then the music comes on, they start playing. I see the guys, 80 years old or not, and it comes back to me, and then the anxiety or whatever goes away, the frustration goes away, and I'm like, forget all that, And then I start feeling that same energy of when I was a kid, like, yeah, there's nothing about this. I'll be back, and I'll be able to take care of my clients. My team is taking care of my clients. I'm never going to let anything happen to my clients. So I'm not concerned about any of the things that were going on in my head that were baseless and foundationless. We'll take care of those people, and I'm not going to let anything happen to them. And just that confidence and that energy that comes from that place, from whatever source. And for me, that is, so that it's just that part of that mentality of, if you've been through some challenges in your lifetime, some failures in your lifetime, and you've come out the other side, then that should give you confidence and a belief that, it doesn't matter, what life throws at me, what challenges arise. I have been through some stuff, and I can go through some stuff again. So these failures or whatever are really not weaknesses. They're battle scars that provide you strength with whatever you got to face in the future. So that, I think, is an important piece of this.
Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us to stay up to date with our weekly episodes. We'll see you next time.